Hello everybody and welcome to a brand new Elder Scrolls Online build video with me, Sherman. Today guys, we are taking a look at Meridia's Champion, a Templar tank build for the Nord race. And this is a expert build, or a master build if you will. This is made for end game guys. This isn't a build that you go and you run just dungeons with, or you just start dungeons with. This is something that you can literally run at max level, at end game, in trials. I will be honest and say that a lot of people complain about the sustain issues of Templars, but I did not notice much of a sustain issue with this build. It's a matter of learning how to play it, and once you learn how to play it, it's pretty effective. So we'll get into that here in a second. But let's go ahead and take a look at the stats. As you can see, we are a Nord Templar. You can be a Imperial with this. You can be pretty much any race you want. The reason I chose Nord for this particular setup is because it is the best race for this setup. So, hands down, you can't get better on this particular setup. So, but you can play other races, you can change some skills out, and I'll explain that when we get there. So, let's take a look at the stats. 20k max Magicka, 37k health, 22k max stamina, and as you can see our spread is 10 into Magicka, 40 into health, 14 into stamina, and that's how we get that good spread of stats there. We do have a 1267 magic recovery with a 733 stam recovery. We don't really worry too much about stam. It's more Magicka on this build, but having that little bit of stam recovery does play quite well into this, especially when you use a potion, which I do want to show. You go up to 861 stam recovery. That does play well when you do like heavy attacks or something else, but that 1471 magic recovery is what's really going to shine here. Don't worry too much about these. But going down here, you can see we are at 25k spell resist with a 22k physical resist. If we buff up with our resistance buff, which I keep mistaking, we go to 33k spell resist with a 30k physical resist. And this is only 2 points into physical resistance CP, guys. So we go to almost just a little over cap on spell resist here, and right under the cap here. The nice thing about the Imperial, or not the Imperial, sorry, the Templar, is they do get that 50% more resistances when they use their class buff, which makes them really optimal for resistance, high resistances. So, alright, going on down. We do get the Minor Slayer from the Kosh. We get Ebon Armory from the Ebon set. We also do have the Atronach Mundus Stone for the higher magic recovery, and we are using Tri-Stat Food. This is going to give us max health, Magicka, and stamina, because we use a mix of all abilities, so works out really well. Let's go ahead and take a look at the gear now. Moving on to the gear. Now, this is where people are going to question things, because I've already been questioned on my last build that this set is not necessary if you use Silverleash. Problem with using Silverleash is it does cost stamina, and this set, the Swarm Mothers, works just as good as Silverleash or any chains in the game. So there's no reason to not use it. So the set here, Swarm Mothers, is 1 piece, adds stam recovery, 2 piece. When you block an attack from an enemy that is further than 5 meters from you, you spin strands of spider silk to pull the enemy to you. This effect can occur once every second. Let me reiterate this. Once every second. So if you have multiple enemies at ranged, and you use a ranged taunt, it would be no different than using chains to pull them to you. The only difference is you're not getting your resources back if you can't pull them. So it's a very effective set, and I have been using this set for 2 years, 3 years now, on one of my main tanks, and not once did I have resource issues. So Whoever keeps saying that this is a resource issue thing, it's not. It's a learn to play issue. And I'm going to be honest with you. That's what it is. Alright, moving on to the next set. We are using Ebon Armory, or the Ebon set, because of the 2, 3, and 4 piece bonus. This gives us max health on the 2 and 3 piece. 4 piece is healing taken, but it's the 5 piece that really matters here. And that increases the max health by 1,118 for you and up to 11 other members within 28 meters of you. This thing has a far reach, but there are going to be occasions where this doesn't reach everybody. It's very few and very small, but it does happen. So, just letting you know. Very good set. Next set we have is Kosh. This is primary tank set because of the 5 piece bonus. Most people will say the 2, 3, 4 piece bonus doesn't really do anything good for a tank, but it still plays into any role you play. So you still get that minor slayer where it increases your damage, you still get that weapon damage, you still get that little bit of crit. It's okay, but it's not necessary. The 5 piece bonus is what it's all about, and that is when you activate a synergy, you send out a shockwave from your position that deals X amount of physical damage and an additional 15,000 damage over 10 seconds. It also reduces the physical and spell resistance of any enemy hit by 3,010 for 10 seconds. This is why this set is used, is because of the penetration that it offers when you activate a synergy. Now we have this set so it works on both bars, along with the Ebon set, along with Swarm Mothers. And this combination is quite powerful on a Nord tank. If you are not playing a Nord, the best set you can use is Lord Warden. In some cases you can use Bloodspawn, but I'm going to warn you now, you will be over pen cap on any race that uses Bloodspawn. With a Templar, Bloodspawn is gonna be over cap. Doesn't matter. So if you are gonna use Bloodspawn with this, one, don't be a Nord, be any other race. Argonian is probably the best for Bloodspawn, but you can use other races like Red Guard, anything that doesn't have a health benefit. Bloodspawn will be really good. And any of them that don't have a resistance benefit will be really good. So, alright, so going over the traits on the gear, we are using 3 infused on the big pieces. You can go reinforced on the chest piece if you want to get a little bit more resistance, even though you don't need it. The other thing you can do here is you can go sturdy on all the pieces, which will give you a higher block cost reduction. You will lose stats though. Moving on to the smaller pieces, we are using all sturdy with health enchants, the big pieces infused with tri-stats, and then on the shield we are using a sturdy shield with a tri-stat. Moving on to the jewelry traits, we are running 2 tri-runes on the rings. This is going to give you more max health, stamina, and magicka across the board, and then we are using an infused magic recovery necklace. Templars don't have the same ability that DKs do, so you have to build for a higher recovery on magicka, because you do use quite a bit of magic abilities, and this is where you really want that recovery to be decent. Not super high, but decent. So that's why we go for about a 1200 or higher. On to the weapons, we are using a decisive one-handed with an absorbed stamina. You can use other enchants here, guys. The only reason why I use the absorbed stamina is it gives me a way to reduce the cost of abilities when I use the absorbed stamina. With being a Nord, you don't have a lot of cost reduction or return on resources, so this works out pretty well on them, and it helps you sustain a little better. Onto the back bar, we are using an infused ice staff with a Crusher enchant. Now, I've already been asked, can you use other weapons besides an ice staff? Can you use a lightning staff? Can you use a bow? Yes, you can. The problem with it is that they do not get the CP resistance bonus that you get for using a sword and shield or an ice staff. And the other reason why I use ice staff is because the ice staff can chill enemies from using blockade. It doesn't happen all the time, but it can happen even on the you know, when doing this. So it's a nice way to have a CC on a class that doesn't have a CC. And like I said, it doesn't happen all the time, but it happens enough to where you can notice it. So the Templar doesn't have a good CC. This is going to be a good way for you to have a CC without having like Talons or something. Now, it's not as effective as Talons, but it can work to the same degree in some cases as Talons. So that's why we use an ice staff instead of anything else. You can use a bow with there is a ability with the bow you can use arrow spray, but you can morph it into bombard, and it does have a CC stun. It works, guys, but it doesn't have the time frame, and this still has a chance of applying chilled, which will lock enemies down. So chilled enemies will be frozen in place and immobilized for 4 seconds. That's why I say this is a better CC than even using bombard. But bombard is an option. You can go bow backbar. Alrighty then, let's go ahead and swap back. Let's finish this out. Going to the food and pots though. Food, you do want to use a tri-step food. Longfin melon pasty with melon sauce. Usually you can pick this up for about 5k for about 200 from most traders. And it's probably the best food you can get. There are other purple tri-step foods that are CP 150 that usually run about the same. But any of them you get that will give you max health, magicka, and stamina, and a CP 160 to 150, or 150 to 160, sorry, is going to be your best option. When it comes to pots, you want to use tri-pots. These are pots that give you health, magicka, stamina return, plus they offer you major fortitude, major intellect, and major endurance, giving you health recovery, stamina recovery, and magic recovery. These work out really well with most tank builds because you don't build really for a lot of recovery in most cases. But in some, where you do build for the magic recovery, these work out really well for you. The return of health, magic, and stamina is really high on any race, Argonian especially. Alright, so moving on now to our skills. Make sure, and I'll mention this again, make sure you get all your class passives, because you never know if there's going to be a time where you might utilize skills that you don't necessarily use that could give you an advantage. Like if you're playing this build and you want to do some extra damage while you're out in the world, you might take puncturing sweeps instead of, say, heroic slash, because you don't really need heroic slash when you're solo playing in the content. Puncturing sweeps would be a better option. And if you take biting jabs, the stamina morph, then you got a resource, you know, you got to worry about that resource and stuff while you're solo playing, when you're playing through quests and stuff. You can also use spear shards, and then of course in Dawn's Wraith there's abilities you can use for damage like Sunfire. You can use the morph for this into the Vampire's Bane. But most of the time, in most cases, that's what it comes down to. That's why you want to make sure you take your class passives no matter what. Is so this way there could be skills that you could take advantage of in certain situations. And it's not just when you're solo playing, but even when you're running dungeons, there's going to be times where you might swap out a few skills to compensate for what you're lacking in your group. Or because your group isn't running with, let's say, a dedicated healer. Using certain abilities does compensate for that. On top of that, make sure you get all your sword and shield passives, destruction staff passives, and then moving on to the armor. Light armor passives, you just need the top 3, because you are running a 5-1-1 setup. You are running 5 medium, or 5 heavy with 1 medium, 1 light. So make sure you take these passives, because they can help you in the long run. On the medium armor, you want to take the top two and the bottom one. The bottom one is the main one, and the Windwalker are the main ones you want to take. The dexterity passive it helps to boost your weapon critical, and in the case of using Kosh, this is actually really good because it does help you do a little bit more damage when you're playing solo. Heavy armor, all the passives. Moving on to world skills, you don't have to be a vampire, but a vampire is an option for this because of their extra mag and stam recovery, and a few of their other passives that you have to be in a higher vampire rank to get can play into your benefit, but at the same time, not really something you really need. It's kind of like, do I need this? If I can survive without it, then I'm fine. If I need the extra survivability, then it plays in my favor. But vampire isn't really necessary. Soul magic, I always take soul summons and soul lock because these two really, it doesn't matter what I'm playing. Having the ability to revive without using a soul gem every hour saves me soul gems. Soul lock, whenever I kill an enemy, if I can get a soul gem back, that's going to be beneficial to me because I don't like running around with empty soul gems. Alright, guild skills. Fighters Guild, you only need Intimidating Presence and Banish the Wicked. These are two that I always will suggest. This one for questing, this one for Ultimate Gen when you're in dungeons and there's undead, danger, or werewolves. Mage's Guild, Persuasive Will. Psijic Order, you don't have to get these passives unless you're going to use Deep Thoughts as your resource return. And you really shouldn't need Deep Thoughts unless you're struggling with resources. And if you do use Deep Thoughts for that, it's good to go with the Consecrated Barrier and Deliberation. This way, when you have this active, you take 30% less damage, but you also get this 5,800 point damage shield. Moving on to Undaunted. Inner Rage, this is going to be a skill you will use with this particular build. Moving on, Undaunted Command and Undaunted Metal. These are important passives to get. Moving on down here to support. You want to make sure you get Magic Aid because you are using Reviving Barrier on the front bar. This is so you can get that extra 10% mag recovery on the front bar. Alright, moving on to racials. Nord racials, you want to make sure you get them all, of course. Rugged is really good for extra spell and physical resist. Stalwart is awesome for the ultimate gen and the max stam. And then Resist Frost is good for the max health and then the cold resist stuff. Moving on to the crafting passives. We just really want two here, and that is the Alchemy, Medicinal Use. Actually, it's 3, but we're only dealing with 2 of the trees. And then the Provisioning, Gourmand, and Connoisseur. These will help your food last longer, and the Alchemy, Medicinal Use will make your potions have a shorter cooldown with a lot longer lasting effect. So it's really effective on for anyone to have those. All right, now going over the skills, starting with the main bar, and some of these skills I will tell you where you can change them out. So starting with the main bar, Pierce Armor is going to be your main taunt. It's also going to deal a decent amount of damage. It's also going to apply Major Breach and Major Fracture. This is going to increase your group's DPS. We want to make sure that we have Crusher up from the back bar from our Wall of Elements with this as well. So we get that higher penetration value. That this will help boost our group's DPS. Tanks don't necessarily have to use Crusher, but it does make it easier if they are using Crusher for the group. Moving on, Heroic Slash. This is a great ability, not one that I prefer to use, to be honest. I like using Deep Slash because Deep Slash applies Minor Maim to multiple targets, not just one. It applies it to 3 targets, and you're never just fighting one target at a time. So this is a trade-off, but this one does give you Minor Heroism, which grants you ultimate every 1 second for, or 1.5 seconds for 9 seconds. This gives you 3 extra ultimate on top of your regular ultimate gen, which is really good. It helps you just boost your ultimate generation. it's a very nice trade-off. It does do a decent amount of damage, and it has a CC attached to it, which reduces the movement speed of your enemies by 4 seconds by 60%. Next up, we have Blazing Shield. I get asked this all the time. Why do I use Blazing Shield and not the Radiant Shield? Radiant Shield is good if you want a bigger shield, but it's only 2% bigger, and it doesn't do as much damage back to the enemies. That's why I like to use this shield. The shield strength itself, this one grows by 4% of its shield strength. The other one grows by 6%. It's kind of an awkward thing, but the other one only does flat base damage when you've activated. This does damage when it ends, and it does a lot more damage because it's based on 30%, 6% of the damage absorbed. So you can use either one here. I just prefer Blazing Shield. Alright, moving on to the next ability we have, and this is going to be our floater ability that we can swap out with the Sigic Order Deep Thoughts. Or if you want, you can even use your class Heal, Rush Ceremony, morphed into Honor the Dead. Do not use Breath of Life, because Breath of Life most of the time will affect you and one other person. Honor the Dead has a greater chance of affecting only you. So it's really nice. I prefer this one. And this one also refunds part of the cost of the ability when used to heal an injured target. So if you heal somebody below 75% of their health, it restores 60% of the ability's cost over 6 seconds. So I prefer using Honor the Dead. But you can use this in exchange for Resolving Vigor. You do have to watch your resources a little bit more on the Magicka side. That's why I prefer Resolving Vigor most of the time over it. So Resolving Vigor is a great heal over time for you and your allies. So it heals you for a little, it's not a huge heal, guys. As you can see, right there it's 15 something, but if you have this down, it does go up to 1703, and that's because you do get 10% more healing done. So this doesn't just affect you, it heals you and your allies, which is, in my opinion, a much nicer trade-off. The next ability we have on our bar, Absorb Magic. You don't have to use Absorb Magic. You can use the other morph if you like. I just prefer using Absorb Magic because it does give us a shield for 21,000 damage and returns 17% of our max health. When this ability slotted, just to have it slotted, you also get 8% block cost reduction and 8% more blocking damage. So it really helps you save your resources, and it helps you on mitigating more damage. You don't have to use this, but I would suggest using it because it is going to offer you the better damage mitigation. Moving on, the final ability here, we have Reviving Barrier. And the reason we have Reviving Barrier on the front bar is this way we can keep up that extra 10% mag recovery because we are using this, the Blazing Shield. This will use a lot of resources, and if we have the high magic recovery, as you can see, it brings back our resources pretty quick, and we do get a 12k shield with that Blazing Shield. But Reviving Barrier, because of that 10% mag recovery, it does give us a little bit more magic recovery, as you can see when we swap bars. So that's the main reason why we have Reviving Barrier here. Don't really use this too often, but you can use it. Alright, moving on now to the back bar, where we have our first ability, Inner Rage. This is going to be our ranged taunt. We will use this to get attention of enemies at range, so we can use our monster set to pull them into us. So this way, like if you're in a dungeon or something and you have an enemy that's like down there, you can range taunt them, block, and you can pull them to you, and it'll only cost you that magicka that it costs to send out that Inner Rage. So it's very much like using talons, or not talons, but chains. It's just your chains are built into your monster set. So that's the reason why we have the Inner Rage here, is so we can get the taunt on the enemies, so they will attack us, so we can use our monster set to pull them to us. Now, you can swap this out for Silver Leash if you are playing a different race. If you are playing a different race, it's better to go Silver Leash than it is Inner Rage, because that way you can use it to pull enemies to you. The range taunt is still good to have, though, and you can swap it out with Blockade if you want, or you can even put it where we have Power of the Light. The next ability we have, though, is Blockade of Frost. And we have this here for the CC because it does reduce the movement speed of enemies by 60% for the duration of 8 seconds. And also, any enemy that becomes chilled will become immobilized as long as they're not a boss or a high, like an elite mob, if you will. And there are several trials where there's elite mobs. So, like, trolls can't be affected by the immobilization in, like, say, ESO. In Hellrust Citadel, there's some certain not named, but elite fighter enemies that can't be CC'd by this immobilization. They can be affected by the movement speed, but just not the immobilization. So, next ability on our bar is Power of the Light. And we have this here because it does apply Minor Fracture and Minor Breach. But please understand, guys, that the main reason why we have this ability here is because every 6 seconds that we activate this, not only does it apply Minor Breach and Minor Fracture, but it also gives us 3 ultimate. So as long as we leave this up for the duration of 6 seconds and we reapply it, we will get 3 ultimate. So it does cost stamina. It's a very low cost stamina ability. Don't stress too much, because the one thing that's nice about Templars is we do have a much larger shield, so we can pop our shields and heavy attack to get resources back if we need them. So this is one of the main reasons why we keep a shield up. We don't block necessarily 100% because we can actually drop our block while our shield's up to heavy attack to get resources. So we can use other abilities. Some people find that to be a little difficult at times. Alright, moving on. Next ability we have is Ritual Retribution. This is here for a heal, a cleanse, and a damage ability. The damage ability from this isn't super great. Neither is the heal, but this will help our group. The cleanse is what we're really after, and the ability to have a synergy for our group. So we have 2 synergies here. We have our Ritual of Retribution, and we also have our Inner Rage, which can become a synergy with a 38% chance. Now, that 38% chance, not a lot of people realize it, but they can activate this, and it does do a decent amount. Not a great amount of damage, but it does do damage, but it also makes it a synergy. So, I always encourage my Stam DPS to activate when this goes up. Also, I encourage anyone to use this synergy. So, especially if they're affected by negative effects. Next ability we have on our bar is Restoring Focus. This is where we get our Major Ward, Major Resolve, our physical spell resistance buff of 5,280. This also gives us 240 stamina back every second, and our physical and spell resistance is increased by 50%. So as long as we're within the circle, we get 50% more resistances. As soon as we step out, we lose that bonus, as you can see here. I'll go back in, and we actually lose some of our resistances. If you're in a mobile fight, Templars are still very powerful tanks. The issue is that you lose that 50% if you're moving around a lot. So try to stay within this 5-meter circle, and most of the time you can stay within it pretty easily if you learn to strafe back and forth. So Templars are a little bit more complicated to play than DKs, but at the same time they're just as easy, in my opinion. Alright, so Restoring Focus, really great ability. And then last but not least, we have Aggressive Warhorn. We have this ability to boost the group's max magicka, max stamina by 10% for 30 seconds, but also to give our group major force, increasing critical damage by 15% for 9 seconds. Really, an ability you want to make sure you're using at the right times, not something you're just popping off just because. make sure you have this going off at the right times when it's really necessary. Don't be wasting this ability. A lot of times you will see groups fire this, like during a burn, like during a phase where a boss is like moving around or something, or where the boss isn't stationary and is doing like a heavy attack where everyone has to block, so the 9 seconds is being wasted. So try not to waste it. Excuse me. Alright. Now, last but not least, let's move on to CP. And yes, guys, this is a standard CP setup I use. You do not have to use this. You can use any CP setup you prefer. I use this one because it's kind of like a universal one, and it works pretty much everywhere. Even in trials where people are like, oh, well, that setup's not going to work. It still works. So starting with the red tree, we have 66 in Ironclad. This reduces damage taken from direct damage attacks by 22%. I have done this with 81 here, and honestly, I don't notice a 2% damage difference because the damage is so small. Moving on, I have 31 into Thick Skin. This reduces damage taken from damage over time effects by 13%. And then we have 56 into Hardy and Elemental Defender. Both of these giving us 12% physical, poison, disease damage reduction, and Flame, Frost, Shock, and magic damage reduction by 12%. So this is really good because it stacks with Thick Skinned and even with Ironclad. So you're not just getting that 13%, you're getting 25%. You're not just getting 22%, you're getting 34%. So you do get a lot of damage reduction. You also have to remember the Templar also gets a passive in the Aedric Spear ability called Spear Wall, that whenever you activate a Aedric Spear ability, you get 8% damage reduction. So when you activate your Blazing Shield, even while the shield is active, you do get the 8% damage reduction. So it applies to all incoming damage. And that also stacks with your CP as well. That is your Hardy and Elemental Defender. So, moving on, we have 40 into Bastion. A lot of people don't understand why I personally use Bastion on a Templar. The reason why is because Templar shields are based off of max health. If I was playing a Sork or a DK, I wouldn't really worry about this too much. But if I was playing anyone using Bone Shield or the Templar Shield, I would use this because you can take great advantage of this passive for the increase of shield strength. A lot of people will say, well, you can take the recovery and it's going to work out better. It doesn't. It really doesn't. The only one that this really affects the most is on our Argonian in the updates, any updates that predate Wrathsone. So any updates that predate Wrathsone, Argonians took advantage of this. Argonian DKs really took advantage of it. But any other person or anything doesn't really need it. So you only need about 5% healing received. This does apply not to your healing taken, but it does apply to any heals that you receive, and it does help. This actually stacks with the 8% you get from the heavy armor passive. We do have 2 into heavy armor focus, and that's because I have 2 points left over, and putting in 2 points into here doesn't increase this by a percentage, so I put it into here so we get an extra 209 physical resist. Templars and DKs get increased spell resist as a class passive, so utilizing anything that'll give you increased physical resistance is going to be good for that particular class. Hey, moving on. We have 56 in a Warlord. This reduces the break free cost by 20%. This saves us stamina resources. On top of that, we do want to put 16 into bashing focus, even though we have 2 block cost reductions, which reduce our bash cost too. This 10% along with that saves us stamina resources if we do need to bash an enemy to interrupt them. Moving on, we have 43 into Mooncalf, 43 in Arcanus, and 43 into Tenacity. The reason I do 43 across the board on all 3 of these is to save resources. This saves me 10%, or this gives me 10% stamina recovery, this 10% mag recovery, and 10% resource return on fully charged heavy attacks. This allows me to sustain really well with a Templar, because we do build for a little bit of stam recovery, and the monster set we're using does give us stam recovery. And if you're using Bloodspawn, you're going to get stam recovery. So building for that stam recovery really helps sustain. Moving on. Tumbling. We have 11 or 13 points in here. This reduces our dodge roll cost by 6%. Now, you have to understand, remember that dodge roll, we have a 6% reduced cost. Because we have the medium armor passive also, athletics, we also get another reduced cost of 4%. So we actually have a 10% reduced cost in dodge rolling because of the way these passives are. So it saves us 10% of our resources when we dodge roll. It's not really a whole lot, but it does, you can tell the difference. We have 56 into Shadow Ward. A lot of people like to put 81 into here, but honestly, that 4% extra block cost reduction, unless you are stacking for block cost, you won't notice an extra 4% here with the way this build's set up. It won't. It's unregistered. It's so small of a difference. So 56 is fine. This gives you 20% with the extra additional excuse me, 36% you get from using Sword and Shield. That's a 56% reduced cost. And then on top of that, you have 20% from the 4 or 5 sturdy pieces. So you actually get a really high reduced cost in blocking, along with the because you get like a 70-something% block cost reduction, along with the 2 block cost reduction glyphs. The glyphs get taken off first before the percentages do, or the reduced cost does. So, all right, moving on. We do have 43 in a blessed. Again, like I said, I run my build with more of a universal type setting, because I'm not so concerned about like how much extra healing my character does, because I'm not a Dragon Knight, so I don't have a super heal like the Dragon Knight does, and if I do need the extra healing, I can always adjust my CP, but I don't really need it. So having 43 in a Blessed improves my healing all around, so it also improves my vigor, and I only need like 10%, like I said. On top of that, we do have the Elfborn, where we put 40 points. This increases our critical damage and critical healing of magic abilities by 16%. So it's mainly here to boost our healing, our critical healing from our 1 magic ability that has a heal. Moving on over here, we have 16 into Physical Weapon Expert. This increases our light and heavy attack damage with our one-handed sword and shield, just to kind of boost that damage. Now, I do have 40 into Master at Arms, and this increases our direct damage done by 16%. The reason I have these points here is so we can get Reposit. Reposit is super important on tanks. So this boosts our ability to deal damage back to enemies whenever we block an attack. Moving on over here, we have 43 into Mighty. This increases our physical poison disease damage by 10%. We have 40 into Thaumaturge. This increases our damage done with damage over time effects. This only affects 2 abilities we use, by the way. So, and it's nice to be able to boost their damage capabilities by a small amount, but it's just that, not that reason. There's more to it than that I use this. But it does help. And then we have 40 into Precise Strikes. This increases our critical damage and critical healing done with stamina abilities. This boosts our vigor by 16%. And then we have 8 points into Piercing. This is just to give us a little extra in our physical pin to boost that physical damage that we do with Sword and Shield, because we're mostly on that bar. So, now if you wanted to, you could lower some of these. So you could put into Staff Expert to increase your light and heavy attack with the Ice Staff, but it's not really necessary. And that is the CP for the Meridia's Champion, guys. And I know Meridia's Champion looks very similar to Meridia's Guardian. The difference is that this one's using Kosh and the other one was using Meridia's Blessed Armor. But I just wanted to show people that there isn't too much of a difference between the two, depending on what races you're using. Now, if I was playing this as an Imperial, an Argonian, a Wood Elf even, or any other race besides the Breton and the Nord, I would use Lord Warden with them. Now, since I'm not using Lord Warden, using the Nord race that for the higher spell and physical resist, or using the Breton for the higher spell resist, which means I have to adjust my CP to give me higher physical resist so I can compensate, which means I have to take the 40 points out of Bastion and move it over. So I do lose shield power with them, but it still works out, and you can, and they are really easy to sustain on the Breton. So, but the thing with Breton is, like I said, you don't want to go over that resistance cap, so you have to use sets like Thorvikins, or like Thorvikin's another one you can use with this, which is really powerful, but I still prefer this because I like to block and pull enemies to me. It's just, it works out so much easier than using a skill that's using resources, vital resources, to keep my block up. So this way I can just use my ranged taunt and pull them to me. And if I need another ranged taunt, I can also do this to get their attention, and that way I get a small shield along with this shield. So I get about a 16k shield. It's pretty nice. So, but yeah, really good. Now, I also gotta ask, can I show these builds in action? If I show these builds in action, every time I've done that in the past, I've basically been ridiculed. Told that these builds still don't work, that I'm not showing their full potential, and that's because I'm not showing them in the content itself being played in a group. I do plan on doing that, guys. It's just that right now I've got just like with any time, I have so much going on that it's hard for me to find time to get into a group to do that. But if I can find time to do that within the next couple of weeks, I will try to get Meridia's Champion or any of the other builds I release for Templars out there to show you that they do work in the end game, so you guys can see for yourself. A lot of people try to say that Templar tanks aren't as good as DK tanks or as good as any tank, and that they're not as effective at end game. They're fine at end game as long as you're not running for competitive. If you're not running for competitive, DK, any tank can tank trials. It's just DK tanks are easier to play and they're better to play for competitive play for score runs. But in any case, Templar tanks, Sork tanks, Nightblade tanks, it doesn't matter, can tank all content, guys. It's not that they're incapable. They're completely 100% capable. It's just you also have to learn to play one because they do play differently. So, but yeah. That's pretty much it for the video. I hope you guys like it. If you do, you guys know what's coming next. Go ahead and hit that like button. If you guys want to see more videos by me, you can subscribe. Other than that, I want to thank you all for watching. Until next time, have a wonderful day. And this guy might see you in game. Bye.